What's up, guys? I wanted to make this video today talking about the hero's journey and what it is and what it isn't. I think there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding this topic, and I think a lot of people think they know what it is, but they sort of blissfully misunderstand what it really is, if it even exists at all. So what is the hero's journey? So the hero's journey is the sort of story arc that many men romanticize, and it's where this ordinary man is living this ordinary, uninteresting life, and he receives this great call to adventure where he faces all sorts of trials and tribulations, and he's sort of forged by the fires of pain, and he comes out of this time spent in this sort of adventure where he's being forged a changed and evolved man. And then he sort of just resides in this little village happily ever after. And the story arc is very attractive to many young men. It was and still is attractive to me, but I don't think the hero's journey is as romantic as many people think it is. I think many people assume that the hero's journey, specifically the part where they're sort of in the wilderness, growing and being matured, is one long story that takes place over a couple months or years, and then the hero, lives a quiet, peaceful life. When in reality, I think men will have the opportunity to go through many hero's journeys, quotes around hero's journey, throughout their lives, and the magnitude and scale of the journeys will fluctuate. As Christians, I believe that oftentimes early on in our walks with God, when we first sort of become Christians, He will call us into the wilderness for a time where we will metaphorically fight lions and bears, and God will solidify us and test us and mature us. But I don't think that God takes us through that for us to reside in this quiet village at the end, but rather that time is to prepare us for the rest of the trials and tribulations that will occur until the day that we die. In reality, the quiet village we reside in comes when we die and we spend the rest of our eternity with God in heaven. I don't think that life is a hero's journey with a happy ending on this side of eternity. And I want to preface that by saying I don't mean for that to sound pessimistic. I know it does. But I don't intend for it to be that way because, obviously there are going to be many moments in life filled with great joy and peace, but, those times aren't an idea that you need to wrestle with. It's not hard to sort of grasp the idea of being happy, and, it's not hard to sort of rationalize the times that you're going to feel joyful and be at peace, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about those times. I'd rather talk about and work through the sort of tougher realities of life on Earth. I think that life is this sort of sequence of trials and tribulations that are constantly maturing us and growing us and making us better people, and stronger people and more effective people for the kingdom of God. I think that God loves to mature us and to grow us and to sanctify us. And I think that the most effective way of doing that is through trials and through hardships of life. And so I think that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be put through the fire. And I think this idea is sort of hard for people to wrestle with because obviously people don't want to be in pain. They don't want to go through hardships. They don't want to go through trials. Well, I guess people do. A lot of times, even for me, I used to get more overzealous back in the day where I'd be like, oh God, bring me challenges, bring me this, bring me that. I wanted to fight. And I wanted to sort of wage war with life. So I guess there is this sort of zealous response to the hardships of life, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But overall, I don't think people like to be in pain. That's not some sort of groundbreaking understanding of the human psyche. But in order to actually be at peace throughout the trials of life, we have to just accept that we're going to be going through hardships for the rest of our lives. And when we sort of accept that and understand our peace comes when we die, it makes it a little easier to fight here on earth. When we accept that truth, that's when we can truly find peace in the midst of the fire. The reason for our trials is to mature us and to grow us. And I heard this quote one time, and this guy said that there's no sense in going through the fire and sticking that raw piece of iron into the heat, into the flame, and it gets hot and it gets red. And when you take it out, you got to strike it and you got to make a difference and you got to change what's been damaged. Otherwise, it's going to get cold and it's going to remain the same as it was when it went in. And so I think that just because you're in the fire, just because you're in a trial, you're in a hardship of life, it doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to come out of it a more mature person. It's up to you whether or not you're going to accept the call that God has for you in the midst of hardship, because hardships are going to come whether you like it or not, but it's up to you whether or not you're going to allow that trial to mature and grow you. And the way that you actually come out of the hardships a more mature person, an evolved person, is by just clinging on to God in the midst of those hardships. You have to stay connected to the vine, to the root throughout that entire process. And through that, God will show you what you're supposed to be learning during that trial, during that time of hardship. And it's important that you do sit there and you learn what God is trying to teach you. Else when you come out of that fire, you're going to remain the same as you were when you went into the fire. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, through all the trials that come to us, all the hardships that come to us in life, God is trying to show you something. He's trying to teach you something through that. And you have to be willing to listen to what he's trying to show you, willing to learn what he's trying to teach you. And so I think if you have this mindset where you want to avoid the hardships of life, you want to avoid pain, I think you've already lost before you've even started the battle. Because what's going to happen is when hardships are presented to you, you're going to try to cheat that and you're going to try to skate on through it, of like avoiding as much pain as possible, instead of sitting there and feeling what's happening and being quiet and listening for what God's trying to teach you in that moment. You're just going to remain the same exact person you were when you went into the fire in the first place. And so I think that the biggest mindset shift that I had that changed my perspective on trials and tribulations is just this understanding that, there's no escaping this. There's no escaping the trials and tribulations of life, the hardships of life. There's no escaping it. They're just going to keep coming all throughout the rest of my existence here on earth. And it was sort of when that I accepted this truth about life and accepted that God's going to be there the whole time, that I learned to be at peace in the middle of the fire. I just think that there's like so many men out there that want to go through the fire of life in order to live a peaceful life on earth and to live this sort of comfortable life where everything has order and there's, control that they have over their life. I think that's like the end goal for a lot of people, is like order and control, where I don't see that really comes to you on this side of eternity. I think that comes when you die and you're in heaven with God. I mean, minus the control part. I don't know how much control do we really have in heaven? I don't know. That's a discussion for another time. But I just think that, like, you can't really hope for an easy life on earth, if that makes sense. I mean, I think you can, but I think you're just like cheating God out of what he actually has for you. Like, obviously you can try to live your best life being comfortable and having total control, but I don't think that's the life that God calls us into. I don't think that's for us now. And like I said earlier, I mean, dude, there's going to be plenty of time for joy and for peace and for celebration. You're going to find, hopefully you find a wife and have some kids one day, and that's going to feel really good. I'm sure it does. I'm sure getting married feels awesome. I wouldn't know. I'm not married, but I'm sure that, those times are beautiful, and you're sort of in this garden, or this sort of, walking through pastures, pretty little flowers and whatever. I don't know, dude. Like, the vision I have in my head is when Anakin and Leia are like rolling through the flowers in the field. I'm sure like there's definitely going to be times like that in life, and accept those and embrace those and enjoy them for what they are. But you have to know in the back of your head, it's coming, bro. Like, she's gonna, what happened to Anakin? What happened in that story, bro? She dies. He loses her. And so well, okay, technically this isn't a good example because he is the one who killed her, but he had a choice. He could have either bossed up and went through that and, came out a stronger Jedi, but he didn't do that. He became like the bad guy and the evil guy, although he was already turning evil before she died. And that's just like that's like maybe not the best representation of what I'm trying to explain. Here's a danger as well of this whole acceptance of the hardships of life. When I first sort of had this mindset of like, okay, the trials and tribulations, the pain will never stop. Like, it'll keep coming at me for the rest of my life. I had this nudging desire every time I would experience a time of peace to sort of tell myself, oh, you can't enjoy this because this isn't going to last. I kept telling myself that. It's like weird sort of self-sabotage where I wouldn't allow myself to enjoy the good things that God was giving me because I just knew that they weren't going to last. I knew that I was going to end up going through another hardship that might have even been harder than anything I'd been through before. But you can't do that. There's like a real temptation to think that way, and you have to avoid that train of thought. You have to take each moment for what it is. And so when the good comes, you enjoy the good. And when the bad comes, you fight through the bad. And I guess that's sort of a discussion of just like living in the moment and, living exactly in the time that God has you in. Exactly. Like, you have to live exactly in whatever situation that God has you in, because then you're just going to become like a super cynical and pessimistic person. And I think that's like a real desire that I have. I'm pretty like cynical, I guess, sometimes. And so I'm kind of working through that myself. And I mean, dude, I could be wrong about all this. This is just what I think in my sort of my youthful state of existence. There's old heads out there that might have a different perspective on this than I do. Yeah, I guess the main point of this is just, if you're out there and you think that life's just going to be all dandy and you want to go through this hero's journey and, you know, a couple years of trials, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're just this like Chad and you came out of it and you're just some sort of boss. I think that that is an unrealistic expectation for life. You should get used to having to fight through the fire for the rest of your life. But yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about the hero's journey. Maybe I'll make another video in the future explaining how I was wrong about all this and how I'm an idiot. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys.